Today we're going to look at every single WoW Classic dungeon and if or how its model would fit into the real world like continent map. And I've done this a couple of times with the Deadmines here, and then more recently with the Deep Run Tram and Ironforge, and to my surprise this little like Tetris exercise has been one of the more well-received aspects of those videos. So here we go, we're going to go in order by level, so this might also be a cool trip through all the classic dungeons and a way to see their models. So first off, here we are in Durotar. We're heading north toward Orgrimmar to look at Ragefire Chasm, and the Orgrimmar model is just laid over this big empty area behind the gates with two deeper sections in the terrain where RFC's entrance would be. And when we get close enough, the model pops into view, and down below in the center is this area called the Cleft of Shadow, under these yellow awning things. And if we go down in there, the dungeon entrance is here. And once inside, you can see why this model isn't even referred to as Ragefire Chasm in the game files. It's called Lava Dungeon. And so I'm going to use the WoW model viewer here to look at the models, and then we're going to do a side-by-side with the maps. So here is Durotar here. The 1.12 map file I have is weird. It doesn't have a portion of Orgrimmar, but we'll fill it out here with the real model here on the right. And such an awesome city. Here is the front gate. And if we get overhead, you can see the yellow canopies I mentioned over the RFC entrance area. And we can go down into there. And there's this gray entrance. And so the way this will work is I'll back out and get a snapshot of the model from overhead like this. And I can temporarily move it out of the way like this. And now we'll look at the Lava Dungeon model. So this is RFC. The gray areas are all of the tunnels, the main areas where you'd fight. Quick peek inside. And you for sure notice right away the same yellow canopied area is on this one too. And this type of overlap with the models is very common, and it's really what's going to allow me to link this stuff together on many of these dungeons. So same deal, we get an overhead snapshot like this. And there's our two common areas, and putting them into the right spot. Of course, from a story perspective, it's underneath, but there is where RFC would be relative to Orgrimmar. And again, looking for common areas or features like this front tower here lets us slide the model into place. And there is how RFC would sit on the Durotar map. Everything seems to fit pretty well. This one was practice. Let's move on to Dungeon 2. So now we're speeding over the Barrens, heading north, and we come upon this big hill with a skull entrance, and of course inside is Wailing Caverns. And if we clip inside, you can actually see the real world or uninstanced portion of the dungeon, which is going to be one of the models. And going down in, the entrance is here. And inside are the instance caverns, which will be a separate model. So same sort of side-by-side view. Here is the hill on the map. And on the right is the exterior or pre-instance model. And the green area is the stuff inside the hill. And as you can tell, it includes the skull entrance piece. And same thing, we get our overhead view snapshot. Slide that over. And then we look at the instance model. And right away you can see it also includes the same big green areas from the other model. And of course, I love rotating these things around. We peek inside, and there is the cavern area where you first zone in. So same thing, we zoom back out for a good overhead view. Then we orient like that, take our snapshot. And now the two common green areas is what lets us link these together. And there's what the entire Wailing Caverns model would look like. Exterior here, and the instance piece here. And our common link is, of course, the skull model entrance, which lets us line this up with the map. And you can see that a lot of the caverns would wind up around far outside of the hill area. And for perspective, here is the entire thing, continent view. Okay, moving on, here is dungeon number 3, and maybe I even look at this one a little too much, so I'll try to keep this one quick. But here in the town of Moonbrook is the farmhouse with the big round grain silo. And so Deadmines is beneath, from a story perspective, these hills, and then back here is the big door where the ship would exit. And if we clip into the mountain and adjust our camera a bit, you can see the pre-instance portion of the mines pop in there. And on the map view, we zoom into the area in Westfall. And for reference, there's the big door. And here's the farmhouse and the grain silo. And there it is on the model. And over here is where you would zone in. You can peek inside quickly. And then back outside. Again, we get a good overhead snapshot. So then here is the instance model. And this is that same like starting area or zone in area in the model that will be common between these two models. So we take our overhead snapshot. This broken off spot heads back toward the farmhouse on the other model. And this little room here is where you are right after you zone in. And like I said, it's on both models, which lets us line up the two models like this. And there is the entire Deadmines as a single unit. Real world uninstance portion here. And the instance piece here. And I know it's obvious, our common feature is the farmhouse, which lets us line things up like this. And you can see what I've mentioned in my Deadmines is backwards video. When you come out of the cavern here and are walking along this first bridge toward the ship, the big door here would be on your left-hand side or the north side, but it should have been on the right side or the south side to line up with the world here. So there you go. There is Deadmines in Westfall. All right, next we are up north, passing here the unfinished area behind the gray main wall, and onto one of the best dungeons and overall coolest early game experiences, Shadowfang Keep. It's got like awesome exterior sections while you're in the dungeon. And then a couple big interior sections like the living quarters here. And on the map, Northern Eastern Kingdoms, here is Silverpine Forest. And you can see the top of the keep here in the center. And there are two instance models for this dungeon, the Eastern Kingdoms version here, but I won't spend much time on this one because it's already here on the map. And so here is the instance version, and you can see it's a little bit bigger. They've added some areas for the interior sections that I mentioned that are bigger than the outside, like supposed spots in the keep. And this is the living quarters I mentioned. And over here, the round things are where you would spiral up the stairs in the final section. And this square room with a broken corner is where you'd fight Aragol, the final boss. Okay, so overhead snapshot like before. And then lining that up with our map looks like this. And yeah, that one was a little more simple. But next up is an interesting one, I think. So now we're moving along the western coast of Ashenvale. This is called the Zoram Strand, I think. And this little temple is the only indicator of the dungeon below. And like Wailing Caverns and Deadmines, you can clip below the terrain and see the pre-instance model portion. And inside are a lot more caves and enemies. So over to Kalimdor on the map. We zoom in on the temple here. And then on the first model is that same temple and those first exterior sets of tunnels. And over in this area is where you would zone in. And I can actually pop in a little gray ring to show you where you'd zone in on the model. There it is. And we've got our rhythm down now, so we orient to the top-down view for a good snapshot. We slide that out of the way. And then on to the real instance dungeon model here. This is a big one. And this sort of lower left 3 or 4 prong section is where you'd start. There's the same zone in ring there. And way over here is the final big cavern where you'd fight the final 3-headed dragon boss, or maybe it's a Hydra, I guess. But we do our standard snapshot from the top view. And my orientation is off here, but here are the 2 common areas of these 2 models. And they combine like this. And so here's our entire BFD instance, and we can use the temple to place it on the map like this. And this is a cool one. You can see how much more of the tunnels go beyond sort of the hills where you start off by the temple, and that the caverns beneath the ground would actually be going out toward the ocean and not under the land. And I'm very aware that the developers simply weren't concerned with how stuff was laid out because it didn't matter. But you know, if they had thought about it, or if the dungeons weren't instanced and were part of the main world, it would have made a lot more sense for this one to bend the other direction, like to the east toward the inlet. All right, next up, we're going to be doing 2 dungeons here technically. So the Stockades is like the Alliance counterpart to RFC. It starts off in a city, and like Orgrimmar, Stormwind is just a model that's laid on top of the terrain, and in some spots you can see through it to the terrain below. And inside this sort of clock tower area is the entrance to the Stockades, which is full of escape Defias prisoners. So I'm lucky that the Eastern Kingdoms map has a really good version of the overhead view of Stormwind, but we'll look at it anyway. So there is the left tower thing here, and it has the entrance to Stockades. And if we go underneath the model, you can see the entrance is sort of like this clover-shaped room with the stairway coming down, and that stairway aims toward the back of the Stormwind model. And if we go back up top and over to the other tower thing on the other side, this one is blocked off in game, but inside is another stairway. This time it goes to the left, like toward the center of the city. And down underneath the model, there's that second stairway going toward the center. And back over there is the Stockade starting pathway that we looked at. So there is the top-down view, and I won't place this model since it's already on the map, but here is the Stockades model. And you know, it's a pretty simple model. It's what you'd expect when you run this dungeon. It's simple hallways and rooms branching off them with that clover-shaped entrance. And if we take our usual snapshot, this model would line up with Stormwind like this. And I make these maps a bit darker so we can see. And now for the other side, this model is called Stormwind Prison. And incidentally, Stockades is called Stormwind Jail. And this is Stormwind Prison. It was intended to be a raid dungeon starting in the other tower area. Here's the entrance clover room again with its stairs. And it's quite a bit bigger than the Stockades, but as far as design, it looks pretty much identical, which might be why they decided not to have it in the game. It was so similar. And this model would line up with Stormwind like this. And what the heck, here is the full city model. Dungeons in the right spot, Stockades, and the prison raid. Okay, moving along. This will be the last dungeon for this episode. I was originally thinking I was going to do 28 different dungeons and city models in a single video, but I'm way too long-winded and the editing takes a bit more than I anticipated. So I'm going to break this into 4 episodes, I think. This is the current plan. Anyway, here we are over snowy Dun Morogh, and we arrive at the entrance for Gnomeregan. And if we again clip inside the terrain, you can see the pre-instance tunnels, including the big elevator that still seems to kill people. And if we go down over here, this sort of twisted tunnel is where you would zone in. And of course, inside are trogs and gnomes doing their gnome things. So zooming in on the entrance, that little bit of like sprocket type entryway is visible on the map, which is what we're going to use for lining things up. And here's the pre-instance model with that sprocket and the elevator section. And then this twisting tunnel here is where you would zone in. And we snapshot that. Here is the instance model. And the entry tunnel actually leads to this big octagon-shaped starting room. And you can see on the pre-instance model, there's a small section of that room, and they're not quite the same. But on our instance model, the lowest round room here is where you would fight Thermoplug. And one more look inside. And then back out, we can snapshot this model. And again, using that kind of twisting entryway tunnel, we line these up for the full Gnomeregan instance model. Using that metal sprocket entry thing as a guide, we can see finally how Gnomeregan would fit beneath the snowy hills here. And that is our full look at the first 7 dungeons. Thanks again to Marlamin and Kruithne for the tools to pull together these maps and models. And if you want to shoot me a sub to make sure you catch the next episode, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.